Hello, my name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I'm the Executive Director of West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. For those that are not familiar with our organization, the forum is a collaboration of businesses and institutions dedicated to promoting sustainable business practices with a focus on climate leadership, social justice, circular economy, and community resilience. Today, we're excited to present a webinar on liability concerns and available incentives for food donation and diversion in Michigan. Thank you to Ottawa Food and the Michigan Local Food Council Network for promoting this event to their members, as well as the members of our West Michigan Food Recovery Council. If you find this program valuable, I hope you will join us for some of our upcoming online discussions, including next week's online forum, Can Michigan's Cannabis Industry Achieve Equity and Prosperity, which will be August 6th at noon. Then on August 12th, we will be discussing health equity and social justice on the West Michigan Lakeshore, part of our Lakeshore Sustainability Initiative program with relevance throughout the state. You will receive a link to a video of today's program with a feedback survey and any additional notes that come out of today's program in an email following this webinar, as well as the slides and links to the resource documents that we'll be introducing you to here today. This series and all of our programs are primarily funded through membership donations. I'd like to recognize some of our renewing members, including Goodwill Industries of Greater Grand Rapids, Rapid Green Group, and West Michigan Whitecaps. If you are not yet a member of our organization, please consider becoming one. We offer both individual and corporate memberships. You may also be interested in learning about our various working groups, including the West Michigan Food Recovery Council, which led the development of the resources we'll talk about in today's webinar. Please email us or send us a direct message in the webinar today if you would like to be included in that or any of our working groups. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists today. For understanding liability and incentives for food donation and waste diversion in Michigan, please welcome Ariel Ardura, Clinical Fellow at Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic, and Corey Manzel, Strategic Services Representative at the Center for Ecotechnology. Thank you, Ariel and Cora, for joining us today. For our attendees, please note that you can share thoughts with the panelists or all attendees through the chat function. You can also ask questions to the Q&A field. We will have time at the end of the presentation for open questions and answer. And thank you again for participating today. Ariel, thank you for taking the time. The screen is yours.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. Let's see, 1 second.
Looks
okay.
good.
Are you seeing? Okay, great.
Yep.
All right. Hi, everyone. As Dan said, my name is Ariel Ardura, and I am a staff attorney with the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. I want to say thank you to you all for joining today. Thank you to the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum for having us, and to Dan and Rose in particular for getting this set up. I'm excited to be able to speak with you all today. So just to give you a little bit more information about the Food Law and Policy Clinic, we provide legal and policy advice to nonprofits, government agencies, entrepreneurs, and other organizations on a range of food policy questions. And we educate students about the role of law and policy in the food system. And so the sort of theory of change that we work with, we have 3 goals. 1, to teach students about these issues, food systems issues in the classroom. 2, to work on clinic projects to bring awareness to these issues and develop creative solutions and provide resources to client organizations, which include everything from government agencies to nonprofits, to individuals and community coalitions. Okay, So as Dan said, we put together, well, we were connected with the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum through CET, who you'll be hearing from Corey in just a little bit. But we got connected in order to put together a couple of, or 4 fact sheets on different food donation related laws and policies in Michigan. And so the areas that we were looking at in particular are date labels, liability protection for food donation, tax incentives for food donation, and then laws and policies around animal feed, or using donated food for animal feed. So I'm going to start with date labels, and the way, so these fact sheets discuss the relevant federal law, and then they go into the Michigan specific laws. So I'm going to start with the federal law, and then I'll talk about the Michigan laws and policies. So at the federal level, or just to start, with date labels are generally suggestions of peak quality. For the vast majority of foods, they don't actually have anything to do with food safety. Nevertheless, most consumers, about 90%, think that these date labels are safety related. And part of the reason for this confusion is that there is no sort of federal system regulating date labels. There's no federal definition or requirement for these expiration dates. There are 2 agencies which have some authority in this area, and those are USDA and FDA, as you might have guessed. So FDA only requires date labels on infant formula, and as of May 2019, they have started recommending that companies use the term best if used by to indicate when there are quality concerns with a food product. So just that, it may start diminishing in quality after that, whatever the date label is. And then USDA doesn't have any requirements, but as far back as 2016, they started recommending that same term, best if used by, to indicate quality concerns. And there are many states that regulate date labels and past date sales, and we're going to talk about that with regard to Michigan in just a little bit. And then in sort of an effort to combat this, very confusing system and some of the consumer confusion, there was an industry voluntary standard that was initiated by the Grocery Manufacturers Association, or I think now they're known as the Consumer Brands Association, and the Food Marketing Institute a few years ago. And what they recommend that businesses do is if they're going to use a date label on their products, that they use the term used by to indicate when there are safety concerns, and then the term best if used by, same as FDA and USDA, to indicate when it's only quality concerns. The problem with this is that it's a recommendation, so companies are not required to use these standards or these standard phrases. And the other issue is that there are actually a number of states that have laws in place that directly conflict with this voluntary standard. So even if companies wanted to, if they're operating in certain states, they're not able to use those phrases. And Michigan is actually one of those states, which we will see in a second. So in Michigan, date labels are required for dairy products as well as for prepackaged perishable products. So retail food, with regard to prepackaged perishables, retail food establishments are prohibited from selling prepackaged perishable food unless the package has a label with a date that includes a month and day. And that date on the product has to be the recommended last day of sale, but that's determined by the person packaging the food, or if there's a written agreement by the retailer who purchases the food. Bakery products, which tend to have a shorter shelf life, if they have a shelf life of 7 days or less, may instead be labeled with the day of the week that they expire. And when packagers or retailers are determining the recommended last day of sale, whoever is doing the date labeling has to take into consideration the quality of the food and the characteristics of the food, whatever kind of packaging it's in, and the sort of customary conditions and environment that it will encounter within commercial channels that it travels through. And they also have to allow for a reasonable period of time after the date for consumption of the food without spoiling. So Michigan does not require that any sort of explanatory terms like best by, use by are used before the date on the prepackaged goods. They can simply put the date, but if they do put some sort of explanatory term, it has to be one of the following: sell by, sell before, last date of sale, recommended last date of sale, or recommended sale date. So if you remember from the last slide, that is in direct conflict with the USDA and FDA recommendation, as well as the voluntary industry standard, which recommends use by for safety or best if used by, neither of which are allowed in Michigan for prepackaged goods. Prepackaged perishable goods may be sold after their label date, but only if they are still wholesome and sound and are clearly identified as being past their dates. And prepackaged non-perishable food does not require a date label. And then with respect to milk, Michigan also requires producers of milk and milk products to label containers with a recommended last date of sale by month and date. And when determining that last day of sale, producers have to ensure that the milk and milk products maintain nutritional levels and don't have a flavor change before the sell by date. And milk and milk products may not be offered for sale after the sell by date unless they are advertised to the final consumer in a prominent way as being beyond the recommended last day of sale. And while Michigan does not require date labels on meat products, it prohibits retail food establishments from selling past date meat that has been removed from a federally inspected retail package. So importantly, since what we're really talking about today is food donation, Michigan does not restrict past date donation of any food products. So if the food is past its date, it's legal to donate it. However, it's important to note that Michigan does not expressly preempt local and municipal labeling laws. So it's possible that cities or municipalities may pass their own, labeling laws with which manufacturers and retailers would have to comply. And they could even pass a law that says that past date labeling is illegal. And so, that's something to keep in mind. Make sure you know the local and municipal laws wherever you're donating. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about liability protection for food donation. So at the federal level, food donation is protected from liability. The law is called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, and this law protects food donors, nonprofits that receive donated food, the volunteers that are working at those nonprofits, as well as gleaners who are not technically donors, but they collect surplus produce from farms and either give it directly to recipients or they give it to nonprofits who then give it to recipients. And so all of these entities are protected from civil and criminal liability unless they act with gross negligence or intentional misconduct. And so in order for liability protections to apply, the donated food must be donated to a nonprofit in good faith. Good faith is not defined in the law, but you can guess that it basically means that it has to be, the donor has to believe that the food is safe and still, fine to consume. And again, it has to go to a 501c3 nonprofit or charitable organization. The food has to meet all federal, state, and local quality and labeling requirements or be reconditioned to meet them. And so, as I said, there aren't a whole lot of federal labeling requirements, but it is important to know the Michigan labeling requirements as well as whatever local or municipal labeling laws might apply. And then donated food has to be distributed by the nonprofit to needy individuals, which again is not defined in the law, but it basically, you can guess what it means. It has to go to people who are actually in need of the food. And then finally, the individuals receiving the food must not pay for it. So the nonprofit that is giving the food away has to give it away for free. And so that's the law at the federal level. It's pretty robust protection for food donation. And then all states also have their own liability protection laws, and some of these go above and beyond the Emerson Act by providing additional protection, and Michigan is one of those states. So the Michigan liability protection law provides civil liability protection to individual and organizational donors, as well as nonprofits that receive donated food. Again, the food must be donated in good faith. And Michigan's liability protection goes beyond federal protections by extending protection to nominal cost distribution of food by nonprofits. And what that means is that the food does not have to be given away to the ultimate recipient for free. It can be sold at a very low cost, right? Nominal cost, as the law says. Nominal cost is not defined in the law, but most likely it means something like covering the cost of administering and handling the food. Importantly, donors are not protected if injury results from the donation of potentially hazardous food in violation of Michigan laws that have to do with the transportation or handling of food. And donors are also not protected if injury results from food donated in hermetically sealed containers that are not prepared by the commercial processor. So, if you're going to donate food in hermetically sealed containers, make sure that it was the processor who did it. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about tax incentives for food donation. So tax incentives are important because there are basically two main reasons not to donate. One is costs of donation, and the other is fear of liability, which we just talked about a little. But donating food has costs. And so tax incentives are cost effective and economically beneficial. And at the federal level, there are a couple deductions that donors can take advantage of for food donation. There is the general deduction for charitable donation, which most people are already aware of. And then there's the enhanced deduction specifically for food donation, which provides almost 2 times as much value as the general deduction. And so the requirements of the enhanced deduction are that the recipient of the donated food must be a 501c3 nonprofit. The donated food has to be used for the care of the ill, needy, or infants. The donated food must be distributed free of charge. So you can see the requirements for the enhanced deduction in many ways track the requirements for liability protection. But then the written statement, there must be a written statement to the donor from the nonprofit recipient of the donated food, just sort of acknowledging that the donor donated that food. And then the food must be in compliance with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which I will be talking about a little bit more in just a little bit. And the deduction is capped at 15% of the donor's taxable income. And we know that it has made a big difference in increasing food donations because when it was, when the enhanced deduction was expanded in 2005, donation increased by 137% the following year. And so there's the federal tax deductions for food donation. Michigan did used to have an incentive, a tax incentive that was specifically for food donation. However, that was repealed in October 2019. And so Michigan no longer has any sort of food donation specific tax incentive. But Michigan does provide a credit of 50% of the cash amount donated to food banks or food kitchens. And the credit cannot exceed 5% of the taxpayer's liability or $5,000, whichever is less. It may be possible to claim the cash equivalent of in-kind donations under this credit. We were not able to determine that. It's not clear in the language of the law. My guess would be that that's not actually possible, but just wanted to flag that, you know, maybe some of you all know someone who you can sort of go to figure that out, but just wanted to flag that it may be possible to actually donate food and then receive the credit for the cash equivalent of that donated food under this law. Okay, and finally, we put together a fact sheet on using donated food for animal feed. And so at the federal level, there are quite a few laws that apply. There's the Federal Swine Health Protection Act, or SHPA, which mandates that before being fed to swine, food scraps containing meat and animal byproducts have to be heat treated for at least 30 minutes by a licensed facility. Food scraps containing only certain processed items don't have to be heat treated, and these include industrially processed and rendered animal products, bakery waste, candy, eggs, domestic dairy products, and certain types of fish. The SHPA requires feeders to keep swine away from untreated food scraps and to keep treated food separate from untreated food. But it does not prevent a household from feeding kitchen scraps to its own pigs, including those scraps containing untreated meat. Then there is the transmissible spongiform encephalopathy rule, quite a mouthful, or the ruminant feed ban rule, which prohibits the feeding of any protein-containing portion of mammals to ruminants in order to prevent mad cow disease. So if you remember, that's how we got a big outbreak of mad cow disease back in the day. And in case you were wondering, ruminants are animals that have a stomach with 4 chambers, such as cows, sheep, and goats. Then there's the preventive controls rule for animal food in the Food Safety Modernization Act. which regulates animal feed that consists of human food byproducts, defined as foods fit for animal consumption, but not human consumption. And this includes things like peels, trimmings, and pulp from vegetable manufacturing or processing. So in general, there are sort of three main regulations. Facilities processing food that will be fed to animals must, one, establish current good manufacturing practices, two, develop and implement hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls. And if the facility receives food from a supply chain, it must coordinate with other entities in the chain to control any identified hazard. But not all facilities have to comply with these three requirements. Some facilities are completely exempt from the rule, including certain farms and other facilities that are not required to register with the FDA. So those might be like really small farms. And then other facilities, such as those in compliance with the preventive controls rule for human food, are subject to modified requirements. And then finally, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or FDCA, mandates that animal feed like human food, cannot be filthy or decomposed, packaged, or held under unsanitary conditions, or contain any poisonous or deleterious substance. In addition, food labels cannot be false or misleading in any way, and they must comply with certain, sometimes product-specific requirements. But in general, an animal feed label must include the common or usual name of the animal feed, as well as the name and place of the feed manufacturer, packer, or distributor. And so just to give you a little example scenario that we included in the fact sheet, say you own a small microbrewery and you want to sort of give away your food scraps to be used as animal feed, and you need to know what practices you should be following when distributing these byproducts. So if you're a brewery, you are producing spent grain, brewery mash, fruit or vegetable peels, and liquid whey as byproducts of creating beer. And breweries commonly distribute these scraps as animal feed, but because these byproducts are not derived from meat or animal products, they don't fall under the SHPA or the ruminant feed ban rule. So the first two laws that I talked about. So, these byproducts can be fed to ruminants. That's safe. And then under the preventive controls rule, brewers must comply with the human food processing good manufacturing practices, refrain from processing the brewing byproducts, and follow those specified good manufacturing practices for preventing physical and chemical contamination whenever they're holding and distributing brewing byproducts. Michigan also has its own laws regulating animal feed. Dairy plant byproducts must be pasteurized, and it's prohibited to use garbage, offal, and carcasses as feed for swine. However, rendered products may be fed to swine and other animals if properly pasteurized. And rendered products are, I'm not an expert, but it's basically like purified animal tissue, or usually purified sort of animal fat to turn it into lard or substances like that that are safe to consume. And it's important to note that, if you're concerned about liability, Michigan and federal law do not provide liability protection for donating food scraps for animal feed. They only provide liability protection for donating food scraps for human consumption. And So that's just something to keep in mind. It's still legal to donate food for animal scraps. And I will also say that we have not seen a single case, where a food donor was sued, either for human or animal consumption. So, it's probably fine, but just wanted to, note that. And that concludes my presentation on our fact sheets today. I want to thank you all again, and I am happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Corey, the screen is yours at your convenience.
Great. I will start projecting now, hopefully. Can you see my slideshow?
We can, yes. You should be all set.
Okay, great. So first, thanks everyone for having me. As Dan mentioned, I'm Corey Mansell, the Strategic Services Representative at the Center for Ecotechnology. And again, I'm really excited to talk here today. So first and foremost, for over 40 years, we have been helping people and businesses save energy and reduce waste. We conduct this work in partnership with entities across the country, including national and local governmental bodies, associations, businesses, and others. And so, for example, we actually partnered with Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic to develop some of the first legal fact sheets, similar to the ones just reviewed here, and also develop a Bans and Beyond toolkit, which reviews the existing organic recycling laws, how they're designed, and the programs and policies that can support their effectiveness. Mentioned in that Ban and Beyond document are these fact sheets, as they can be tools to foster more donation programs and programs that feed animals. So it's great to have partners such as Harvard and the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum to bring together this expertise and the information, hopefully helping more businesses and more people reduce and divert their food waste. Today, I will be discussing how we have utilized the legal fact sheets produced by the clinic to foster and encourage businesses, again, to implement their food rescue programs, and as I mentioned, sending their food scraps to animal feed. And then I will also review 2 case studies where it's done in practice. So now more than ever, it's important to reduce, rescue, and divert our wasted food. And when I use the term diversion, it means sending that surplus inedible food for composting, anaerobic digestion, and animal feed. So Feeding America, the national organization of food banks, projected the impacts of the past few months, and we could see an increase in well over 10 million food insecure individuals in 2020. And in addition, ReFed also shows that the US is spending over $218 billion on food that is never eaten. So looking at these 2 statistics, we're not only wasting food that could be feeding our communities, but we're also wasting money. And we want to distribute these legal fact sheets because they do provide the potential solutions and address the perceived barriers or hesitancy to donating food, which I will also touch upon. So here's a snapshot of the Wasted Food Solutions website that we developed, and it hosts state-specific resources for commercial and institutional reduction, recovery, and separation of food scraps, as well as a toolbox of best practices, guidance documents, and case studies. So please feel free to check out the website to find information that's specific to Michigan and beyond. And so, for instance, of course, we do have the legal fact sheets on Michigan's page. We know there are a lot of questions, comments, concerns that arise when businesses are thinking about donating their food or separating it for an alternative reuse. And so to address these comments and support the business community, we developed the guidance documents incorporating resources such as these fact sheets. We offer on-site assistance to walk through a business and pinpoint areas where donation could happen or separation, etc. Ultimately acting as an information clearinghouse and matchmaking service for businesses that are looking for outlets and connections. Also on this website, we showcase success stories to hopefully motivate others. We know that's definitely a key driver when you see your neighboring businesses donating food or separating as well. So our work offers the opportunity for us to hear the common challenges, concerns, and questions from businesses with waste, as well as those who rescue it, haul it, process it, etc. And this statistic here does not surprise us. So the Food Waste Reduction Alliance found that half of food manufacturers, a quarter of retailers and wholesalers, and 40% of restaurants cite liability as a barrier to food donation. However, we also found that these businesses need support reviewing the liability protections that are already in place on the federal level and on the state level, as well as the tax incentives that are available to them, which these legal fact sheets ultimately help do. So as we all know, sometimes these great resources can be left on the figurative shelf, and really they're most helpful and impactful when they're actually being utilized. So therefore, we've worked with many entities to distribute these documents to get it into the hands of folks that are going to implement the programs or support them. I encourage the attendees today to think about the avenues and ways we may be able to integrate these documents into existing programs, as well as your own presentations, and then of course, use them to start your own donation programs. And as I mentioned, we frequently integrate these fact sheets into the supplementary resources that we have in the toolbox, as well as state-specific resources for implementing sound and safe food rescue programs. So a guidance document that's talking about the transportation, the time and temperature that is safe for donation will also cite these fact sheets as a resource. We've also collaborated with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to review these fact sheets, and now the State Department is including them as a in their packet of resources for businesses that need to comply with their organics recycling law in the state. So their state has a requirement for businesses that are generating a certain threshold within a certain vicinity of a compost or anaerobic digestion facility to find alternatives to disposal of their food waste. And these fact sheets definitely help support those other opportunities that exist even beyond just composting and anaerobic digestion. Another key aspect is involving public health officials. So we've also provided trainings on food rescue and source separation at public health events and reference these fact sheets. So one health agent in Massachusetts now has them on hand at all inspections because as you're meeting with the business, you can, and reviewing their health and safety practices, you can also remind them that you're supporting food rescue because many businesses may cite their local health department as a barrier, but that may not be the case. Start that conversation, and these legal fact sheets can also help support those conversations because it really simplifies the liability protections, state labeling laws, tax incentives, etc. And for those that are listening, again, feel free to download these documents and share them with your other networks to help spread the word and awareness. Social media can be a great tool for this. We've seen businesses or helped businesses implement donation programs where they post about it online, and they link to these legal fact sheets, helping others find the information that they need. So education and technical assistance is also a key driver to supporting the use of these fact sheets. The biggest opportunity that these fact sheets provide is the clear language that we can refer to, and also supports and reinvigorates that conversation around food recovery and source separation. As we just heard, the fact sheets definitely help break down some of that legal jargon or the confusing language that we sometimes get overwhelmed by. So really it helps me, at least for many of the states that they've produced these legal fact sheets, understand what the protections are and really help pare down that information. I wanted to also share an example of a business we worked with where they reviewed the fact sheets and then implemented a food rescue program. So now they're donating about 80 meals of excess food per month, which is a noteworthy amount. And we have a video case study of this Lennox Hotel case study online, and you can find the general manager directly saying, you know, I needed these legal fact sheets to go to the rest of my team so that we all felt comfortable around a food rescue program, and we all had the best practices and the information to do so. So not only is this program helping their community by feeding more hungry people, it's also an opportunity for them to boost their bottom line, also mentioned in the video case study. So at the end of the day, food rescue programs can really be a win-win. And so anything that we can do to get more activity happening is great in our minds. So last but not least, we've also worked with a brewery / restaurant to implement a program that separates their food scraps to send it for animal feed. And they expanded their program to include composting in addition to the animal feed efforts, where along with recycling of their bottles, cans, cardboard, etc., helps them achieve a 72% diversion rate. And this was really exciting for them because they were receiving restaurant inquiries and questions around, you know, how are you contributing for a sustainability effort, and they could list off, you know, the fact that they're working with a local animal farm in addition to a composting operation. And it's great to have the legal fact sheets that review food rescue, but it's also great to have one for animal feed because at the end of the day, there's going to be food that's unavoidable and not quite edible for human consumption. So it really helps align with the EPA food recovery hierarchy, where you can be looking at all the different strategies that might be the right fit for your business. Thanks again for having CET join the webinar today. I hope you appreciated some of the examples of where we've worked with other entities to get these legal fact sheets out there. Really, for the attendees, encourage you to download them, use them, and then I'm sure report back to Dan or us on how it's working out. So thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Corey.
And I will stop sharing my screen now.
Before we go on, before we open up to questions, I have a question of my own, and I think where we find the liability conversation comes up in our work the most is when we're working with event planners and venue hosts who pretty much instinctively try to explain to us that due to liability restrictions and more often than not, they specifically cite like it's illegal for us to donate materials from the event, even if they're not plated and served. How how can we use the fact sheets to open up conversations with people who have who are already using liability and regulations to create barriers to donation?
That's a great question. I mean, I think you can give them the fact sheet and point them to the laws. There are no federal laws and no laws in Michigan that prohibit food donation from hotels or events. So I'm not sure what, I'd be interested to see what they're citing to say that that's, you know, it's illegal for them. But certainly there are no federal laws, and as far as we've found, there's nothing in Michigan that prevents that. So I think I would, you know, point them to the laws that say it is okay, and not only is it, you know, allowed or not illegal, but you are protected under both federal and Michigan law.
And I would jump in and say, you know, that's where it's really important to have these conversations with the local stakeholders as well, so that you can work with the event planner, hotels, as well as their local health officials, using these fact sheets to show, is there anything that we're missing here? Can you point us to where, you know, you might not be allowed to donate food? And then also, I would just recommend, you know, we want businesses to feel comfortable donating. And so walking through the best practices of a food rescue program can also help support their understanding of what it really looks like. You know, you're not just putting food out in the back for somebody to pick up. You are being mindful about how it's being done.
So we do have breweries, retailers, regulators, manufacturers on the webinar today. Do we have any questions for our panelists? All right. Seems like we had a pretty tight presentation there. We'll be sending out our resource documents in the with the presentation today. If for those who are interested, and I see one individual at the very least who has asked about this, we are in the process of translating these into Spanish. So that will be made available to Spanish-speaking restaurants as well, and the materials we send out with the slides will also have Ariel and Corey's contact information if you have any further questions. And thank you for. Oops, what do we got here? Oh, we do have if you like Marisa, if you'd like to stay on the line for a minute or two after we wrap up today, we can ask them directly if you like. And just FYI, one of the questions just came in was a request if you'd be willing to do this presentation for other organizations as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to learn more about the other events, and I'd be happy to.
And we can keep you in the line for a minute for a minute here after we wrap up, Marisa. But with that, we are adjourned today. Thank you so much for participating. We hope we see you at one of our upcoming webinars as well. And if you are interested in becoming more involved in our work in the specific area, our next meeting of the Food Recovery Council will be a month from today, also via Zoom, and you can just contact myself or Rose to get involved in that. So again, thank you.